My name is Peter C. Clemente. I was born 88 years ago on October the 17th, 1922 in Brooklyn, New York. The two most significant events in my life were the 32 months I spent during World War II and the 26 years in the Federal Bureau of Investigation as a special agent.
Hey, what's up, guys? Thanks for checking out American Made. Today we have a special guest who's going to share a very interesting story, a story about his father, who was an FBI agent for 26 years. He investigated some of the biggest mob bosses in the country. My guest today is Gary Clemente. Gary, how are you doing? Thanks for coming here on the channel.
Thank you for having me, Jesse. You've got a great program. Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Well, in 1950, my father was first brought into the Bureau. That's when he was hired in 1950. And he started off at a small field office in Quincy, Illinois. And later on, I happened to be born in Springfield, Illinois. And I think within a year's time, my father, after his exploits in Quincy, he was transferred to the Cleveland office. He was there for about 2 or 3 years before he eventually was transferred to New York. And I do believe he put in for that transfer. He requested to go to New York. So that's where he was eventually sent to. And then just jumping forward a little bit, after New York for a number of years, he was transferred down to Miami. So that's more or less the logistics of his travels in the FBI. And it wasn't until 1957 when a very, very big event happened. And
yeah, I wanted to ask you about that. Yeah.
Yes, it happened to be the big mob enclave that happened in Appalachian, New York. And all of the biggest mobsters you can think of in the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, decided to meet at the estate of another mobster, happened to be Joseph Barbera. Well, my dad had heard about the mob enclave. The entire FBI knew about it. And because my dad was in New York at the time, he wanted to get transferred to something that was being newly formed by Hoover. It was called the Top Hoodlum Program. And my dad particularly wanted to become involved and be a part of the Top Hoodlum Squad within New York. He made the powers that be known. He wanted them to know about it. They did have him come in. They immediately made him a part of it because a big reason, Jesse, was because he was Sicilian. He could speak Sicilian. He grew up around it as a little boy, and that's a big reason why they had him within the Top Hoodlum Squad.
I went to the office of the New York City office of the Federal Bureau of Investigation on Foley Square, secured an application, and of course I was accepted, and I entered on duty on November the 27th, 1950. I volunteered for assignment to the criminal squad, and since I spoke Sicilian before I even spoke English, I thought that the knowledge of that language would come in handy in the investigation of these gentlemen. One of the first things I did when I entered on duty with the criminal squad was to complete summary reports on the individuals assigned to me, and one of the first was Meyer Lansky. Subsequently, I was assigned to investigate Carlo Gambino.
While he was in the Top Hoodlum Squad, he was the first one ever to do a face-to-face on the street interview with Carlo Gambino.
Wow.
Who is Carlo Gambino? Carlo Gambino happened to be the most powerful mob boss in New York at that time. He was the capo di tutti capi in Italian, which means the boss of bosses.
Right.
And my father had it in his mind as an idea. He wanted to approach Gambino. And so he approached my father as he came up the sidewalk. And my dad got out of his car and accosted him face to face and said, "Excuse me, Mr. Gambino. My name is Peter Clemente." Now, my dad was speaking to him in Sicilian, much of it, with some English. And he said, I'm Peter Clemente. I happen to be with the FBI, and I'd like to ask you a few questions, if that's possible. And Gambino said, "Excuse me, you say you're who?" "I'm with the FBI." He says, "You're with the FBI? Your name is Clemente? You're Sicilian. I hear you talk Sicilian. So you're one of us." Says, why are you bothering? Why are you bothering me?" He says, "Well, because there's some very important things that you know about." And so he interrupted him. Says, he says something to him, profane. And he says, "Yeah, I've got nothing to tell you. I'm an honest man. I have nothing to tell you, and I don't know why you're bothering me. You should be ashamed of yourself." My father said, "I should be ashamed of myself? You should be ashamed of yourself. All of us within the Italian community are ashamed of you for what you've done to our people, the bad name that you've given our people." Well, Gambino didn't like that. He says something in Italian, which means "F you, va fanculo," turned his back on and walked away, left my father there. And then later on, there was another meeting between my father and Carlo Gambino, which is another story. He was listening to Carlo Gambino on the other side of a wall in the Golden Gate Motel in 1963. And Gambino never knew it.
Now, is that
is
in
another
Florida?
Fascinating story. Excuse me?
Is that in Florida?
That was in Florida. That was in Miami Beach, Florida. Carlo Gambino wanted to go down to Florida to conduct business. Now, Miami was considered an open mob city. You were not allowed to have a mob boss in Miami, Florida. They did have one up in Tampa. It was Santos Trafficante. He had his own family up there. And the New York guys, the Tampa guys, they had scores activities. They call them scores. They had scores. They had activities. They had illegal activities that they conducted down in Miami. And that's when my father happened to be down there as well, too. So, yes, Gambino was down there in Miami Beach, and there's a whole interesting story about my dad wiretapping Carlo Gambino on the other side of the wall. And Gambino happened to be there with his wife as well, too. And two other guys. I believe, let me get this correct. One of them was Tommy Palmisano, and I think the other it might have been Tommy Greco. I'm trying to remember. But what happened, Jesse, was one day while my dad and another agent were listening in on a reel-to-reel tape on the other side of the wall, on the next room, the next unit over from where Gambino was staying. They were recording him. And how did they do this at the time? Well, back then, Jesse, all of the phone lines were fixed into something called an A block. And the A block was a little 2 by 2 inch wide little block that was stuck on the floorboard, the baseboard of the wall. And that's where the phone line went in. That's where they put a bug right in there, and they were able to hear everything. Anybody that came into that room. So what happened was they were listening, recording it on the reel-to-reel tape. They had headphones on. One of them would listen, the other would take a break, maybe get something to eat or relax, and one would listen. Gambino and his associates come in through the door, and the other agent, his name was Dorner, and Agent Dorner was listening on the headphones. The mob guys come in along with Gambino, and the two associates were angry. They were just really, really upset. They said, "F this and F that," and the whole scuttle was that they thought that somebody was following them. He said, "Well, outside of what happened, Jesse, was they found this. They were outside and on the street, and FBI agents were tailing them." My father, by the way, had gotten upset about that. So why? He said, "Why are these guys following? We're going to get our cover's going to get blown. Why are they even doing this?" They were taking pictures. They weren't being discreet about it.
Yeah.
So they came back in. They were yelling and shouting, "What are they doing? These guys are following us." And Gambino, very, very calm individual that he was, says, "Relax, take it easy. These people are doing their job." That's what he actually said. "These people are doing their job. What do you want?" He said, "Well, I don't care." When Tommy he said, "My gosh," he starts looking all over the room. He said, "They could be wiretapping us right now. They could be wiretapping us." So he looks over the room. He's looking under the lamps. He's looking here, looking there, and he's looking he looks under the bed. And then Dorner's listening to this. All of a sudden, Dorner hears, "Ah!" But what happened was Tommy had found. I hope this isn't a family program. Dorner had found a used prophylactic underneath the bed. Oh my gosh, they're looking for the bugs. They could be anywhere. They could be wiretapping us right now. So Dorner hears this through the headphones. He says, Pete, so we need to shut this down." He said, "They're on to us." So what are you talking about? They're on to us. They're talking about that they think that they could be listening to us. My dad says, "Look, calm down, Fred." His name is Fred Dorner. "Calm down, Fred." And got him to calm down. And the mob guys calmed down. And what happened was the Tommy and Parmesan, they left. And my dad told Fred, he said, "Look, at night when Kate and Gambino were together alone at night, we shut the reel-to-reel tape recorder down because that's their private time. That has nothing to do with any of this."
Right.
And so that's what they did.
Yeah.
So that's the story of listening into Carlo Gambino at the Golden Gate Motel.
Well, did anything ever come out I mean, did they ever hear of any incriminating evidence, or mainly just them talking in their room?
Nothing that was really earth-shattering. Gambino was pretty smart. He kept things discreet. He would never release anything that would be too incriminating to get him arrested or anybody else arrested. So no, from that, no. But if gathering that sort of intelligence, period, was just really important.
Right.
And hearing his voice, recording him. So that really was a fairly momentous event in that regard.
Yeah, I've heard other stories about Carlo Gambino really keeping cool about the situation and not really getting too mad at FBI agents or police officers. And, they're just doing their job. And I think there was several agencies parked outside his house like 24/7. As you mentioned a few minutes ago, they didn't hide it at all. They was just out in the open, made it obvious. They let everybody on the block know that we're watching this guy. We suspect him of being who he is, a mob boss. So that's why I found it really interesting when you said your father approached him, and he ended up getting, almost cussing him out. That's pretty out of
Yeah.
character for what you normally hear from Carlo Gambino.
And like I said, Gambino didn't have any bodyguards with him at the time. He didn't need it. Now, if you listen to, I'm going to give a shout out to Michael Francis. Michael Francis is, as many of you know, watching these programs, Michael Francis was the top capo within the mob, and Michael is doing a standout job presenting all of this information as well too. But Michael Francis will talk about how they had cars parked outside of their house when he was a kid, and he was aware of it. And the bureau was always watching him, and he was always aware of those vehicles out there watching him, almost 24/7. So that's the interesting part of all of that. How things can change with as far as security is concerned with the mob.
Right. Yeah, Michael Franzese has really been doing a job on his channel, over 1 million subscribers, and I enjoy watching his channel as well. And I've heard him tell those stories of being a kid playing baseball in the street and knocking the ball over to the agent's car and walking over there, and they put their foot on the ball and wouldn't give it back to him. And it was just out in the open, like, we're here, we're watching your father, and it's just a part of everyday life.
Well, Michael became to hate those guys. He just hated the FBI agents. He just hated their guts, and I can understand why. But here's the interesting part. Michael and I, we're both the same age. We're the same age. But the interesting thing was, and we lived not too far from each other. I was living in New Jersey, growing up there. He was growing up in New York, and his father was a famous, well-known mafia luminary. My father happened to be a fairly well-known within his circles special agent with the FBI, investigating organized crime. So the two of us, from our different dynamics, is a fairly interesting thing to think about, and how he
Yeah, it
grew
is.
up to be the stand-up guy that he is, and how he has renounced all of that life to become very much a devout Christian, family man, astute businessman, and great podcaster is a credit to him, Michael Francis.
Yeah, I agree. And hopefully in the future, maybe who knows, maybe the two of you can get together and share and compare your stories and your upbringing with, both of you had fathers, like you mentioned, his father, Sonny Franzese, was a well-known boss in the Colombo family, and then your father being a very prominent FBI agent on the top Hoodlum Squad. That would be a fascinating interview, a podcast. Hopefully that's something y'all maybe will do in the future.
Well, I don't want to let the cat out of the bag too soon, Jesse, but the two of us have been in touch, and we are trying to make that happen. We are trying to make that happen. We'll see, God willing. I would love to do something face to face with Michael. I think it would be really, really awesome.
I think so. Now to move on just a little bit, in some of the notes that you sent me, I know he did the written summaries of Carlo Gambino. Your father also translated some memoirs of a Sicilian mobster. Can you talk about that a little bit? I found that pretty interesting.
Oh yes, there was an individual named Nicola Gentile. Okay, I will say this: before there was Joe Valachi, there was Nicola Gentile. Okay, this is an individual that came from Sicily to America, was a member of organized crime in Sicily at that time, came to America, became a leader of mob families in Kansas City, Cleveland, and Pittsburgh. Nicola Gentili, a very astute, shrewd individual who was very successful within those circles, who decided at one point to write his memoirs. he wrote his memoirs down, and he wrote it in Sicilian. I have those memoirs. I have the original written uh, 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 copies of those memoirs, detailing his life within the mob, which was unheard of. Nobody would write their memoirs down.
Right.
Well, he wrote his memoirs down, and he decided to flee to Sicily after he had enough of mob life. He was an older guy at the time. He fled to Sicily, and he left behind his memoirs that were written in Sicilian. The FBI got a hold of it, and it was brought to my father's attention. And because my father was Sicilian, and I remember this, he brought those papers home, which were pretty thick, and sat at a table with my grandparents, my Sicilian grandparents, and the three of them, along with my father, translated the Sicilian of Nicola Gentili and his experiences within the mob, and the life that he had led. So that was another seminal event, I think, within the history of organized crime, the Nicola Gentili papers. And so what happened later on, Jesse, was when Valachi was brought into the spotlight, much of what Valachi had talked about in terms of the organizational structure of the Italian mafia, the boss, the underboss, the consigliere, the advisor, the capos, the lieutenants, the soldiers, the soldati, all of that was corroborated previously by Nicola Gentili within his memoirs.
Right.
So that's another fascinating thing that my dad was involved with.
Now, you mentioned Joe Valachi a few minutes ago. Can you talk about who Joe Valachi was and kind of what made that whole situation so pop? You know, everybody was aware of that. It was in the papers, and kind of how that happened.
Well, Joe Valachi was a soldate. He was a soldier uh, in the mafia, and he was not an influential figure. He was like many soldiers, even current day guys, guys all the way up to the 80s, 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s. Many of the soldiers within they call them buttmen too, because those were the guys they usually had do the heavy work, the bang bang stuff.
Right.
And many of these soldiers, they could barely make a living. My dad would tell me that some of these guys they could just barely scratch out a living, Gary. And not to feel sorry for them, but many of them weren't even involved in victim crimes. So they were involved with gambling, maybe victimless crimes, maybe if that, many of them. But so Valachi, being the soldier that he was somebody that got himself into some tight spots. He found himself in the Atlanta penitentiary, and he was fingered for death by Vito Genovese within the Atlanta pen. And I believe, if memory serves me, if you want to read a great book, read Peter Moss's book, The Valachi Papers. Great book. Donnie Brasco is a great book. The Godfather is a great book. These are all great books. You got to read them. Goodfellas by Nick Pileggi, great book. So he was in the Atlanta pen, and they put the finger on him. He was marked for death. So Valachi decided, well, if this is how they want to treat me, how they treat me so warmly, I guess what I'm going to do is I'm going to sing, I'm going to talk. So he told the powers that be, word got out that he was willing to talk to the FBI. And they extracted him immediately as fast as they could up to a facility up in Monmouth, New Jersey. And he was going to talk about how the mafia was organized.
Through the testimony of Joseph Valachi, who decided to cooperate with the FBI following his murdering an individual he thought was Joseph Beck, a potential hitman assigned by Vito Genovese to murder Valachi.
So he was willing to talk. They couldn't wait to hear him, and they were going to have my father. They wanted to have my father go in to Monmouth, in the jail in Monmouth, and talk face to face with Valachi. Well, interesting thing happens. Valachi did not want that. Why? Because he found out that they said, well, we want this Sicilian agent, Peter Clemente, to talk to you. Well, Valachi, bad idea, broken English and everything. I don't like that idea at all. Why? He's Sicilian. Well, who do you think is out to kill me?
Yeah.
Another Sicilian who happens to be Vito Genovese. How do I know that your FBI boy isn't involved with Vito? No Sicilians. What do? They went back, they talked, they conferred, they decided to have this nice Irish special agent by the name of James Flynn to go in and talk with Valachi. That's what happened. Flynn goes in. He had multiple conversations with Valachi. Valachi opened up and told him about how the mob family was constructed, how it was organized, and Flynn would bring back all of this information from Valachi to my dad and say, "Hey, Pete." Valachi would talk about this, what is it? The capo regime. Capo regime. I said, well, Dad, I said, well, a capo is, the head. The regime is the head of a regime. Well, later on, it came to be, we found out that they really referred to it as the capo de Cina, not the capo regime. Those were the little sorts of things that were lost in translation that my dad helped out with in terms of getting things a little straighter in terms of what Valachi said. So that's what my pop did with Joe Valachi.
Yeah, and now most people watching this will probably know Joe Valachi and that story, and but for people that don't, just the significance of the way they used him, putting him on TV, because up until that point, the American public had never seen somebody that was actually explaining the formation, as you mentioned, the formation of the mafia and the structure and the rules and the whole making ceremony. And, I've watched clips from that hearing, and I just wanted to reiterate the big deal that was at the time in America.
Yes. Yeah. I remember it too. I remember it. I'm about to be 72 years old in 3 days, I think, Jesse.
Okay.
And
well, happy early birthday.
I remember those hearings. I remember the hearings vaguely, and they had him on screen. You see, what happened was everybody, Americana knew that there was organized crime through gangster movies Everybody knew that there were gangsters. They knew
Yeah.
that there was such thing as gangsters, but the word was starting to filter out little by little that there's this very, very sinister organization. It isn't just a bunch of guys that look like George Raft and Edward G. Robinson with nice suits on. They talk funny. It was much more than that. It was very, very sinister, and these people were they had their way within the fabric of American life. It was just starting to come out there, and then when Joe Valachi is going to reveal all of this on national television, oh, that was a big deal.
Right.
It was very, very enlightening and fascinating. He wasn't a very articulate individual, but just seeing his face and hearing him talk about some of these things, even in the very in the broken English sort of way of talking that he had, it was still nonetheless interesting and fascinating. I found.
That was around what year? Around 1963? Is
It might have been 63, 62. 62. It could have been 61, 61, 62, right in there. That I believe that's when it happened with Valachi.
okay. Now I wanted to ask you about this. Speaking of 1963, and I want to bring it up, talk to you a little bit about it a little later because I know your father did some research involving this. But I wanted to ask you about the Kennedy assassination and your father's relation to that investigation, and did he have a part in any of that? I know for a time there, people speculated that the mafia could be involved. So I wanted to see if your father had any connection to that investigation.
Right. There's a whole discussion about the FBI, the mafia. Uh, was there a conspiracy? All of that. At the time of the Kennedy assassination, I remember it vividly. I was in school at the time. I was a grade school kid. I remember when it happened. A lot of people did when they heard about JFK dying, getting killed. They remember that moment when they heard the news. It was every life just seemed to stop right then and there. And I think that in many respects, because I remember how shocking it was at that sort of ground zero moment of American history. And I think that is spread all the way to today to the point where people still can't believe that this beloved president could have been killed in that fashion without there being some form of conspiracy.
Yeah.
I'll get into that briefly. My dad was not involved with any investigation when he was in the FBI at that time in 1963 when Kennedy got shot. He was still involved with organized crime. He wasn't. He was not investigating it. Um, the FBI supplied as much information as they could to the Warren Commission about it. Um, Hoover and the FBI did not believe that there was a conspiracy. I don't remember reading anything publicly from Hoover about it. I would have to look that up and research it. I'll be truthful with you. Um, but there wasn't anything coming from the FBI that they felt that there was a conspiracy. All of the information that they gathered went to the Warren Commission. The Warren Commission felt that it was one man and one man alone. Okay. I'll tell you this, jumping ahead to my father after he retired from the Bureau, and many years later, in the 90s, my dad was, now my father was what? He was a professional investigator, okay? Wasn't a journalist, a professional investigator. And he investigated the Kennedy assassination, did a voluminous amount of reading, uh, read up everything on it, and wrote his assessment about what he felt was probably the cause. He felt that Oswald did act alone. That was his assessment. And it wasn't because the FBI had a certain look on it. I'll say one thing as short as I can. My dad and the other agents had a love-hate relationship with J. Edgar Hoover. They loved the fact that he was protecting America. He did anything that he could to protect America and to protect the integrity of the FBI. He also had a bitterness about him because he was the sort of individual that ran the FBI like with an iron fist. If you did the slightest thing wrong, well, buddy, you were gonna get shipped off to Butte, Montana, some tiny little field office that looks like an outhouse if you
Yeah.
did something wrong. So my father was the type of individual, if he felt there was something that he didn't like about Hoover, he would say it. He would tell you. And he wasn't trying to protect the FBI by saying that he felt that JFK, that Oswald acted alone. He really did believe that within all of his within all of his investigations and readings. He told me, he said, Gary, Oswald's own brother even said that he felt that Oswald acted alone. There was just too much. Oswald was a very unbalanced individual mentally. He had mental issues. He wanted to become a communist so bad. He went to the Soviet Union to live, and the Soviets disliked him so much. They thought he was such an oddball and such a pain in the neck. They kicked him out of
Yeah.
the Soviet Union. They didn't want him anymore. So, bottom line, my dad through my dad's readings and his thoughts on it, he felt that Oswald acted alone. Now, you want to get back to the mob angle of it. There are a lot of mob guys, and I've talked to another individual I know that's connected to the New York mob. He his father-in-law was a made guy in New York. He was This individual was he wasn't a made guy himself, but he was very much involved. He knew the world, he knew the life. He felt that Carlos Marcella
Right.
with the Louisiana family was
Mm-hmm.
involved with killing Lee Oswald and
Yeah.
was involved with killing JFK. Michael Francis feels that the mob was involved with it.
Yeah. I've heard him say
I
that.
disagree. Yeah, I disagree, and I can give you my personal reasons for it. But though in terms of my father, that's what was going on.
Hey, what's up, guys? I wanted to take a second to remind you, please hit that subscribe button. And if you like what we're doing and want to make a donation, you can do that via Cash App at American Made Channel. Now, let's get back to the video. To move on a little bit, I wanted to talk about after your father's involvement with the top Hoodlum Squad. In some of the paperwork that you sent me, it says he was involved in the 6 Squad. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Well, that was when he was transferred down to Miami. He sought a transfer out of New York, wanted to go to down to Miami. That's what a lot of people did back then. If you were a New Yorker, you wanted to get out. You wanted to get away from the snow and the cold. And at that time, in the early '60s, Miami and Florida was just this haven to be. So my mom and dad had 6 kids, and he put in for a transfer. Got it, went down to Miami, and was still involved with organized crime as part of what they called the Six Squad, SIX, the Six Squad. And it was all still a part of the top hoodlum program, but he was
Okay.
still involved with organized crime and investigating matters that happened down there. As I said previously, Miami was an open city. It was an open mob city. You couldn't just start a family there. But you were free. You were free to do as many illegal activities as you could, provided you had permission from the powers that be, from your boss. Donnie Brasco, Joe Pistone, and Donnie Brasco, the book Donnie Brasco, perfect
Right.
example. That's what happened with Joe and his involvement with Lefty and Sonny Black, with the club, the nightclub that they started down there. So that was something that happened with the permission of the powers that be. And my dad just continued his work down there, and he did get involved with H. Paul Rico. He was partners with H. Paul Rico at one time, and that's a fascinating thing that happened with the two of them getting together as well too.
Yeah, I want to ask you about Paul Rico. Before we move on to that, in Miami, Santo Trafficante was a very powerful boss down there. Did he have any interactions with him or any surveillance on him?
Uh, Not with the Trafficante in particular. Trafficante operated uh, mostly in Tampa. That was his purview. That was his territory. How much of his underlings were down in Miami, I couldn't exactly tell you, but I'm sure that there were more than a few of his people that were operating down in Miami. Trafficante was definitely a major figure uh, in the mob. Some of the subjects that my dad investigated while he was in Miami was people like Guido Penosi, Eddie Coco, Frank the Bompensiero. Um, Another was when you watched the movie Goodfellas, if you remember the Paul Sorvino character, Paul Varro.
Mm-hmm.
Paul Varro was one of my father's subjects as well too that he investigated closely. So those are some of the people that he was involved with in the Six Squad in Miami.
Did Paul Vario have business dealings or something else that would bring him to Miami?
I don't know exactly what Paul Varro did down in Miami, but there wasn't enough information that my father wrote about Paul Varro that I've uncovered so far. I've got, as I mentioned before, this is only 1/5 of
Mm,
all the paperwork
wow.
that my father left behind. So much of it, I have to go back and reread and find out some more things about Paul Varro. That could be another a whole other show. Now, let me say this about my father and how we operated
Okay.
on a face-to-face basis with these mobsters. Some of them very, very dangerous people. Okay, my
Definitely.
father's attitude was always this. He's told me, son, I talk to these people and I give them respect, and they give it back to me most of the time. Most of the time, they understand the word respect, and they treated me the same way that I treated them. I never talked down to them. I never used profanity around them. I was always a hard-nosed agent who didn't take any crap from anybody, but at the same time, I know that if I treated them decently, that they appreciated that. And from that, they would give me information that, which is what I sought. I'm a professional investigator.
Right.
I need information. It doesn't necessarily have to be that you want to be an informant for me. I'm trying to find people that want to be informants for me. I try to do that. I try to get them to flip for me, but if they're not going to do that, if they give me surreptitious information,
Right.
little tidbits here and there, I will go with that.
Yeah.
So that's how my father operated, and He dealt with some very, very unsavory characters. Now, Guido Penosi had to be one of them. He was.
Detectives from the district attorney's office on a stakeout in an organized crime investigation. The man they are watching, Guido Penosi, who says he is a roofing salesman. State and federal authorities say Penosi is a New York hoodlum from the Gambino Mafia family, a man with a long criminal record.
He was one of them. He was always foul-mouthed around my father. Always. My father would show up, say hi to him. He said, "Oh, what the F are you doing here? Leave me alone." And my father would say, "Guido, what did I ever do to make you upset like this? Come on.
Yeah.
Let's calm down a little bit, okay?" What happened was Penosi wasn't filing his income taxes at all. Made lots of money. Him and Joe Bisogno, he was another character that my father dealt with. And my dad found out that he wasn't paying his taxes. And he was involved with a lot of illegal activities that he knew about. And you know what? It probably got under my father's craw a little bit that every time he saw him, he would launch into these profane, explicatives. Every time he saw him, he didn't like that. Long story short, he got the IRS involved with Penosi and the fact that he wasn't filing his taxes and made a lot of money. Long story short, he got Penosi busted. He wound up arresting him, and the IRS put the pinch on him for 44 months in jail for not paying his income tax. So got to be nice to Mother Nature, which happened to be my father.
Yeah.
And here's another thing too about how my father operated, and it was the same way that Joe Pistone operated. Let me say this too: Joe Pistone is an American hero. I believe that. I believe that my father was an American hero too. These two guys were from two different FBI generations. Joe came a little further after my father when he was doing his undercover work in New York. My father had already retired, but Joe's an American hero. What he went through was extremely dangerous. I don't know how he survived. I have my thoughts about what would happen to Joe Pistone. Here's the $64 million question for everybody. Everybody assumes that Joe Pistone, Donnie Brasco, if he'd been uncovered by the mob, would he have been killed? I have my thoughts on that. That's a whole nother discussion. But in terms of how Joe Pistone operated, he was a stand-up guy, and all those mob guys will tell you that he operated as somebody who was above board. He wasn't looking to frame anybody. If you did something illegal and it was on you, he grabbed you for it. Okay.
Yeah.
He didn't skirt or beat around the bush with things or imply anything. He would get hard evidence on people, and that's how my father operated too. He didn't frame people. He wasn't crooked. He was above board at all times. He followed the rules succinctly. Did my father, like I told you about with the Communist Party USA, the informant, did he fib? To get some information? Yes, but not making up things whole out of whole cloth. That's not what my father was. That's not the way Joe Pistone was. So that's how you do things. You're a stand-up guy. You're a stand-up FBI agent. That's what my dad was. I will say this, Jesse, in terms of what my father's career was. There were two different sides connected with each other. There was the FBI side, there was the organized crime side, and there was the FBI organized crime side connected with one another, meeting head on. But you can talk about those two entities separately for lengths of time.
Right.
We could go on for hours about what the FBI was like, my father's life with just within the FBI and Hoover. He was a Hoover agent all the way. So all of that can add for hours and days and weeks of discussion. Fascinating discussion.
Yeah, there's a lot there to be discussed. Now, a few minutes ago, you mentioned your father's partner, Paul Rico. Could you talk about him and who was Paul Rico?
Paul Rico was a fascinating individual, highly intelligent. He was an expert bridge player. He loved playing cards. He loved making $2 bets at the racetrack. Highly intelligent, a very enigmatic, complicated person in many ways. His, if you want to call it, his claim to fame was being part of the extremely scandalous FBI Boston office scandal, where two FBI agents, John Connolly was one of them, became corrupt agents and were on the arm with Whitey Bulger and working with Whitey Bulger. Paul Rico originally formed Whitey Bulger as an informant when he was a young guy, when he was very young. Paul knew that Paul Rico knew that he had lightning by the tail with this guy, Whitey Bulger. Bulger was a very, very dangerous individual. Him and Steve the Rifleman Fleming were part of the Winter Hill gang of Irish mobsters up in Boston, and Paul Rico was involved with developing Bulger as an informant, working in the Boston office. Gosh, it was such a fascinating story about him. Eventually, he after the Boston office scandal, he was transferred down to Miami, and he worked for a short time as a partner with my father. Did they do anything of consequence together? No. But they were involved with going out, doing surveillance, investigating people, talking to people for a short time. They used to go to the racetrack together to check out the wise guys at the racetrack and kind of keep tabs on them. A funny short story about my father and checking out the guys at the track. When my dad was in the New York office, when he was at home, I would notice sometimes that he would go in the backyard in New Jersey, okay, and he would sit outside and sun himself with a reflective aluminum foil reflector, so he could tan his face. Well, it's just his face. Why are you doing that, Dad? I didn't know at the time. Later on, he told me, he said, well, I tanned myself so that when I went down to Miami and I checked out the wise guys at the track, I wanted them to see somebody who was tanned and not some white-faced, untanned individual.
Yeah. Didn't
Checking
want them to
them
stick
out to
out.
make them suspicious.
Yeah. Didn't want to stick out in any way.
He didn't want to stick out, exactly. So that was funny. So the two of them, Paul Rico and my father, used to go to the track, check out the guys, and all of that. And much later on, after my father retired, my father and I had started a book about Paul Rico and his involvement with the Boston mob. Not the Boston mob, the Boston FBI office, and the whole Boston FBI office mob scandal, because people rightfully or unrightfully so thought that Rico was involved. They thought he was a rogue agent, and people thought that he was involved with the murder of Roger Wheeler. Roger Wheeler was the owner of Miami High Life. He was a very, very successful Oklahoma businessman, multimillionaire.
Mm-hmm.
He liked gambling, and he bought Miami High Life. Long story short, there were questions in the minds of some people whether Paul Rico, after his retirement, was he involved with fingering H. Paul Rico to get him killed by Whitey Bulger and John Martorano. Those guys. They killed Roger Wheeler in his car. People thought that Rico was involved with this. One particular individual was Detective Mike Huff from Oklahoma. Mike Huff eventually wound up getting Rico arrested and put in jail for the murder of Roger Wheeler. I don't believe that Rico was involved in his murder. I don't believe that. There was circumstantial evidence that made you believe that, but I don't believe that.
The murder, in fact, was committed on May the 27th, 1981, by John Martorano on the instructions of James Whitey Bulger and Stephen the Rifleman Fleming, who were co-leaders of the Winter Hill Gang.
Another part of Rico that got him into this sort of hot water was the fact that he was at one time in front of a congressional committee, and they asked him questions about the fact that there were 4 mobsters in the Boston area that were eventually arrested and put in prison. And later on, there was much evidence to be found that these 4 mob guys, these were stone cold killers, these guys. They were stone cold killers. Lamone was one of them. I forgot the other 3. It was a big story. They were put in jail, eventually released later on. And there was just a lot of talk about how Rico was involved with their incarceration, and that one of his informants, I think it was Joe the Animal Barbosa, was really the one that fingered them, wrongfully so. Barbosa, the animal, was really the one that got them put in jail. And so what happened was later on, Rico was in front of a congressional committee. They asked him some questions, and they said to him, so how do you feel about the fact that you are probably partially involved with the incarceration of 4 innocent men that were later released from jail, from prison because of you? Well, Rico's sitting there, he's thinking, these were 4 stone cold killers. They have no remorse for anything that they've done, and you're asking me this. So he replied with only, "What do you want from me? Tears?"
Yeah.
That did not play well publicly, and a lot of people really put a black mark on him. Said, "Well, he's obviously a guilty sort of individual," and that didn't help his cause at all. So that's part of the reason why Rico was eventually incarcerated, and eventually he died in prison. He died in jail, wrongfully so. Go figure.
Yeah, I've heard of him. His connections with Whitey Bulger and the Roger Wheeler case. I've read some things about that, some articles and stuff, and maybe in the future that we can discuss that a little bit further, because there's a lot there as far as Rico and those different cases you just spoke about. There's a lot to unpack there.
Exactly. I will tell you this, short form, that my dad did have questions about Rico's motives and what he was doing. And it's because a lot of the fact that I mentioned Rico was a very enigmatic person. You just really couldn't get to know him
Hmm.
off the bat. Kind of gruff, kind of quiet. It wasn't very animated. So those are some of the questions that my father had. But in the end, he believed that there really wasn't enough there to incriminate Rico. That he was what he went through it was a tragedy, and that is those are some of the papers that he wrote about Rico. He titled it the tragedy of H. Paul Rico. It's another story. See, it's even another movie if you want to make one about Paul Rico.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot there. Now, moving forward just a little bit, 1976, your father he eventually retires from the FBI. What brought on his retirement?
He was forced to. He was forced to. Uh, at that time, um, if you were 55 years of age, you're a special agent. That's the end of the line. It can only go so far.
Hmm.
You're talking about people that had to carry weapons and guns. I guess maybe part of the reason was they didn't want older individuals carrying weapons. That might have been part of it. So what happened was, at the age of 53, my father said, "You know what? I think I want to leave on my own terms." And what he did was, after 24 years of being away from law practice, he decided, well, I'm going to study law again and uh, and pass the bar, which he did. And it was pretty amazing because he studied for the Florida bar on his own. He studied books. He has some tapes, but he took the bar one time after being away from it for 24 years and passed.
Hmm.
So when he became let me backtrack you. He retired in 1976. He had been he had been in the bureau for 26 years. He could have stayed another 2 years. He was 53 at the time. He could have stayed another 2 years, and he could have been in the bureau 28 years. But he decided to get out on his 26th year. That's when he
Okay.
retired. He says, "I'm leaving. Sayonara. Thank you for everything," and became a criminal law attorney in Miami.
Do you think that he missed the FBI? I mean, he had so many years of such an exciting career. Do you think he missed it, or was he content with retirement?
Well, I think while he was practicing law, he was too busy with that to think about those other things that you're asking about. Later on, yes, he did. After he retired from law, he always circled back to his years in the bureau and came back to writing more. Even when he was in the bureau, yes, he was writing uh, extensively about his experiences, diaries and my life this and articles this.
Hmm.
He was doing all of that, but when he left his law practice, he went back to talking about the bureau constantly with me and other family members. He still kept writing. He very much enjoyed his years with the bureau. I will say this: I forgot to mention his last year in the bureau, his 26th year. He was more or less taken out of organized crime, and he was doing things like investigating bank robberies. So he was away from organized crime. And I think maybe he never admitted it. That might have stung a little bit because
Yeah.
if you're an organized crime an investigator with the bureau, you were part of the creme de la creme,
Mm-hmm.
cream of the crop.
Yeah.
And so they kind of relegated him to investigating bank robberies. They knew he was close to retirement, close to his 55 years. And at the same time, too, one thing he did enjoy, Jesse, was a lot of the police academies always had him come to their academies. And he had these really wonderful, extensive courses about vice, gambling, prostitution, um, organized crime as well too, that he gave to police academies all throughout the state of Florida that he traveled extensively with. So that's what happened to him after his before and after retirement.
Okay. Yeah, I was interested in some of the things he did after retirement, and you mentioned him doing a lot of writing. I'm glad he did. He passed those things to you, and here we
Yes.
are talking about it. And I think, like you mentioned earlier, he is an American hero, and a lot of this information people need to hear it. It's a lot of good information here.
Well, thank you, Jesse. After he retired, and he was out of law as well too, he enjoyed his time. Yes, he still kept writing about his experiences in the bureau, writing essays, writing articles about certain mobsters, and many of those things were repeated from different articles that he would write, and you would get a different slant on things. So he did that. He enjoyed painting.
Okay.
He was an artist. He was very. My father's always been a very creative individual.
Mm-hmm.
My father's a very charming individual. There's no wonder that he could get as much information that he did from these hardcore mobsters. He was very charming, but he was Italian like them too. They could relate to him. He was a great storyteller. Great storyteller. Um, he would sit around with the family and tell us everything, and it wasn't just about mob stuff. Um, he loved painting. He loved writing. He loved fishing. He loved doing things with his grandkids, taking his grandkids out fishing, teaching them how to fish. My father was a teacher. He always loved teaching people,
Mm-hmm.
uh, giving them his experiences in life. He's always giving of himself. And as I mentioned, up until his passing, he was as sharp as a tack. Pretty amazing. Close 2 weeks short of 95 when he passed away. So he had a brilliant, amazing life. And thank you very much for allowing me to reveal this man to everybody, because he was a part of American history. And the mafia, this is a whole nother show too, Jesse, about how the mafia, La Cosa Nostra, the Italian mob, they were a microcosm of American life. They were part of the human condition. These men, they had wives, they had children, they had families,
Mm-hmm.
they had all the trials, tribulations, and concerns that any other person has. Yes, they were on the other side of the bars, and we were looking into that zoo that they were part of. And they were these wild creatures that were really, really dangerous. But we enjoy watching them. It's a whole nother discussion too, talking about why people are so interested in organized crime and the mafia. To this day, your program, Michael Franci's program, all of these, I call them mob casts, all of them, there's lots of them out there. People can't get enough of it. Michael
Right.
Francis talks about, I go to Singapore. There's hundreds of people there with a mob convention, and the first thing they ask me is, "Where's Jimmy Hoffa buried?"
Yeah.
So they know about all of this that happened here. So it's fascinating. I have my views on why people are still so fixated and fascinated with the Italian mob. I can go on and on about that.
Do you have an email or a website or anything that you wanted to give?
Sure, my Gmail account is GP Clemente Books, BOOKS, GP Clemente Books at gmail.com. That's my email. I don't have a website. And I forgot to mention, which is important too, Jesse, that I have only recently been doing this and revealing my father's life. This is all new. For many years, I've just been involved with so many different things in my life, but it's all been recently, fairly recently, after my mother's passing last month. I said, you know what? I need to get my father's name out there and his legacy. So it's really been just recently. I haven't been doing this for years. I've had all his papers for years, this
Right.
treasure trove of information. Now I am just revealing it. And you are the very first one ever to have all of this information from my father, Peter C. Clemente, revealed to the American public. So thank you.
No, thank you. I'm honored that you would come here and we could talk about your father. He was an amazing guy, and there's so much more. Hopefully we can do it again in the future.
There is still so much more to talk about. There really is, and it's a fascinating subject. The FBI, organized crime, as introduced in a new and fresh way that you've never heard before. That's what we're about.
That sounds good. Well, thanks for coming on, and folks, thanks for checking out this video. Be sure to hit that subscribe button and keep following American Made. I appreciate it.